Good morning. I have the dubious pleasure of being the only thing that stands between you and lunch. I want to begin and end my talk with some quotations from Fyodor Dostoevsky, the great Russian novelist, or more importantly, the great Russian Christian novelist. In The Brothers Karamazov, he says, "Beauty is mysterious and terrifying. God and the devil are fighting there, and the battlefield is the heart of man." Now, I have never begun a speech in nearly 50 years with a political anecdote, but I wanted to do so this morning. And the reason is that most of you for the last couple of days have been talking about elections and politics, about legislation, about regulations, about policies, about standards. You're doing good and necessary work to improve the society, but nothing you do, no victory that you have will last unless we fix the culture underneath it. Because that is determining. Washington, Sacramento simply reflects the culture around it. About almost a quarter of a century ago, I found myself, to my surprise, at a small dinner party with a fellow named Newt Gingrich. Some of you may remember him. He was, at that point, as important in American politics as the President of the United States, and he had engineered a historic political realignment, and he was in the flush of victory when I met him. It was the first of the many times in Washington I realized that the only preparation for Washington politics was to read Shakespeare, specifically the tragedies, in which great heroes came to great falls. But Gingrich went on, and he's talking that he had created a new American electorate and that his party would be in power for the next 50 years. So much the alignment. He talked about the legislation he was doing, all of the impact he was having. After a while, I began to enter this, and as we began to have a difference of opinion. And I finally told him, and I didn't mean it in a mean way, I said, the consensus you've put together won't last more than 4 years. I was wrong. It fell apart in 2 years. Now, the thing that one should have noticed, and a poet knew this right away, what was his headline? A Contract with America. Now, I want to ask you a question. How many of you like signing contracts? I've been married to the same wonderful woman for 43 years. We did not sign a contract. We were married and we gave all to one another. You only do a contract when you have two things going on. One, you don't trust the other person. And secondly, you both think there's a pretty good reason it's going to fall apart. Contracts do not motivate people. They do not give a nation a vision. And that's why I want to talk this morning seriously about something, namely beauty. It is not a subject that people think much about now, not even really in the art world. Beauty seems a quaint concept, almost embarrassing in philosophical terms. It brings you back to an older, simpler age. We have discarded beauty in philosophy, in aesthetics, and in art because it doesn't fit a postmodern age. It's not a word that you'll hear used much in the university except with quotation marks around it. It's a kind of kicking horse. But I believe the absence of beauty as a positive concept in society has left a huge hole in the middle of our thinking. And this is not only in philosophy and aesthetics, but in education, in politics, in civic life, and in the Catholic Church. And its absence has doomed much of what we are trying to do in culture, public life, civic life, and religious life to failure. Now, the great work of saving the culture will depend on the rehabilitation and the understanding of beauty as a positive concept and a value to our society. Now, since beauty is a concept that most people don't understand, I have to begin with some very basic statements. First of all, beauty is not a synonym for prettiness, for attractiveness, for any kind of external sort of pleasant appearance. Now, you wouldn't know this from our society because we have beauty parlors, beauty aids, beauty pageants. Once I was in Chicago and I saw a school of aesthetics, and I said, wow, but it was cosmetic surgery. So the first and most important thing is to understand that beauty is a concept, a term, a word that refers to something deeper and more comprehensive than superficial attractiveness. Perceiving beauty, we have the sense of seeing into the center of something, to understanding why something is perfect in its own way, a perfection apparent not only on the surface, but in the very heart of the thing. Beauty, therefore, is something that we perceive simultaneously both externally and internally. Now, I can give you a lot of classic examples of beauty. I mean, think of the sunset on a beach. Think of the towering redwood trees that are, really only a few miles from here out towards the coast. These are classic images of beauty, but they're a little misleading because beauty isn't necessarily pretty. We see beauty in a hawk sweeping down to seize its prey. We see it in the swirling cone of a tornado. We see it in a thunderstorm across a valley. The Californians may remember a couple of years ago when we had a night-long thunderstorm full of lightning that set the entire state on fire. That storm was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. The experience of beauty is a human universal, though some people have more aptitude towards it than others, and each culture has its own language for describing this. But beauty has an odd and singular effect upon us, so singular, in fact, that I want to begin talking about it by talking about that experience. What happens when we experience beauty? I think there are 4 stages of this. First is an arresting of intelligence, a moment of stillness. Now I'll ask, is there anyone in this audience who is not busy or distracted? I mean, those of you not typing on keyboards, I think it's especially, humanity is always busy and always distracted, but suddenly, again and again and again, we find ourselves arrested by something, an unexpected slowing down of our attention and a desire to saturate ourselves in something that we're seeing or hearing. It could be a flower, it could be a landscape, it could be the ocean, it could be the face of a child. And that brings us to the second stage, which is a thrill of pleasure. We have an unusual sense a disproportionate sense of the object's importance. All we want to do is to pause a moment to be in the presence of this beautiful thing, a flower, an image. Why would it cause us such joy? Because it's usually something that has no direct relationship to us, but it affects our senses, our mind, and our emotions. This pleasure is strangely disinterested. We don't necessarily want to possess the object. We simply want to be in its presence. In fact, the word pleasure may actually be the wrong term for it. Perhaps the better word is joy. In the Old Testament, you almost never see the word beauty. What you see is the word glory that is used this. We want to participate in this glory. And unlike pleasure, which is often something that we can purchase. I mean, I can buy a Snickers bar and it'll give me pleasure, but I don't get joy from it. I don't see glory in it. And growing out of this joyful pleasure, this arresting of our attention, is the third stage, which is a heightened sense, a heightened perception of the shape and meaning of that thing. The thrill of looking beyond our normal sense of the world, beyond the external surface of this thing, and seeing something some important element, and I'll say this as a Catholic, of creation. The vision may be disturbing. It's like when the hawk sweeps down to seize its prey, but it is linked with a sense of truth, the deep and significant rightness of the pattern that we perceive in this joyful experience. We seem to see this beautiful and meaningful pattern unfolding in every aspect of the thing, creating a sense of unity and variety and unity. We feel an illuminating radiance. This is the glory in the word that's used in the Bible. From this source of beauty, it's like a vision of redemptive order in a fallen world. And then finally, we come to the fourth part of the experience of beauty. The moment vanishes. It is fleeting. It's beyond our power to control. We go from joyful elevation and sink back into our commonplace existence. We cannot stare at the painting or the landscape at will and recapture this. We have the memory of the moment, of this intense experience of stillness, pleasure, and enlightenment, but it is beyond our control. We all know what the postmodern intellectual world thinks of beauty. Postmodern thinkers do not consider beauty either a universal experience or a reliable source of perception. It has no connection to objective reality, nor is beauty something that has any kind of value above the political or the social. For them, beauty is merely a social construction, an illusion in the eye of the beholder, a series of signs fabricated to create the appearance of meaning. It's conditioned by social convention and shaped by class, race, nation, gender, and ideology. It is a gesture by one group to raise their status and authority over another group. Beauty is all surface. Beauty is neither true nor universal. It is something made rather than discovered. Now, this is a very clever and tidy intellectual strategy, but it doesn't feel quite true to our experience of beauty, which often has nothing to do with asserting our social status or endorsing some socioeconomic value system. nor is the postmodern theory explains the somewhat disinterested relationship that we have with the things that we find beautiful, which make us vividly conscious often of our individual insignificance in the vast plan of creation. I would suggest that we go to the edge of the Grand Canyon and admit that it is not a subjective phenomenon, nor is it a cultural fabrication that we have created to assert our own status. It is part of an objective reality created by something or someone other than ourselves, to which we respond properly with awe and wonder. And the experience of this beauty makes us understand our own insignificant tininess versus reality. It is sublime, but also humiliating. Now, I would suggest that we simply look at the classical Christian notion of beauty, which for 2,500 years was enormously productive to the arts and society, to civic life, and to our faith. In this tradition, beauty is the pleasure we get from recognizing the particular manifestations of a broader universal order. Beauty is a true and powerful way at looking into the nature of reality. Beauty is therefore one of our most powerful and natural ways of knowing the world. This is the conviction expressed in the Christian tradition. God intends us to recognize and love him through his works. This is what the poet Gerard Manley Hopkins meant when he wrote, "The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out, shining like shook foil." Beauty is our connection to the harmonia mundi, the essential harmony of creation. It speaks to us into our incarnated humanity. It is an expression of God's will and the world and a cosmos that are intrinsically beautiful. Now, I don't have to do it to this audience, but let's take God out of the equation and substitute modern physics or biology, and you have essentially the same idea, namely that the order of the universe, from the microcosm of the atom to the macrocosm of the galaxy, is interconnected. The universe and the natural world has form, and that form is inherently beautiful. As products of nature, we have been formed to respond to and recognize this order. And for artists, we do not create beauty, we participate in it. We recognize the order of the universe, and we use small parts of that, in a sense, to frame our creations. Thomas Aquinas, who I think is a generally good source for clarity, said, "Beauty makes us delight in the very act of knowing." Beauty makes us delight in the very act of knowing. And beauty, therefore, in the Christian tradition is truthful, pleasurable, and if you follow Aquinas' argument, is transformative and revelatory. By speaking to our deepest and most complete human instincts, beauty becomes the highest and most complete integrative way of knowing the world. The world is charged by the grandeur of God. It does flame out and shine like shook foil. The capacity to discern and appreciate beauty is universal. It is an inherent part of human nature, which leads you to the question, why would God or nature or evolution, you pick what you want, give humans this complicated and universal pleasure reward system of beauty if it wasn't important? It cannot be coincidental, it cannot be trivial, since it is both powerful and universal. People are transfixed by beauty. Intuitively, they know something significant is happening. They feel a deep human hunger being satisfied, and an experience that they will find transformative. This is what Oscar Wilde meant when he said, "Man is hungry for beauty. There is a void." Now, is there anyone in this room who has not repeatedly traveled thousands of miles at considerable expense, at often personal trouble, simply to be in the presence of something beautiful? You all have. You've done it again. You probably have got it planned for next month. You didn't come up to this by talking to your accountant and saying, this is probably the best and most profitable use of your time and money. You did it because there's a hunger inside of you, a longing to be in the presence of these things which will illuminate and transform you. And this is what Aquinas was talking about, which is that beauty has pleasure guiding us to knowledge, and from that knowledge of the thing, of its perfection, we feel love. So from pleasure to knowledge to love, and he says that love transforms us. Now, there's probably at least half of you saying, this is all very nice for a poet to say, but what does it matter in the important work that I'm doing right now? America is a very practical nation. It was created by Protestant Puritans who were deeply suspicious of beauty. And beauty is not even today something that grown men and women talk about. We talk about the proper concerns of grown-ups: money, power, technology, and probably in California, real estate. Now, I would argue that this pragmatic American attitude, which has really enriched this nation, has made us blind to those things that can't be expressed as abstract ideas or numbers, the languages of politics, business, finance, and science. These are great abstract languages which have split the atom, which have created prosperity, but they are not universal languages. The trouble with our practical American worldview is that most of the world, most of the time, does not understand things as numbers, as abstract ideas, but only as totalities. We live in a material world as incarnate beings, and we are made up of both body and soul. We perceive things holistically, simultaneously through the intellect, emotions, physical senses, imagination, intuition, and memory. We naturally and characteristically perceive embodied truths rather than abstractions. We are drawn to beauty, not to logic. The people who change the world are generally those who make their impact by embodying their message in a story, in a song, in poems, in images and symbols. Social and political change is not primarily driven by ideas. I hate to tell you this because all of us are working, trying to change them by ideas. Social and political change, and I'll just use the example of the 1960s, this tremendous youth revolution that happened in the 60s. It wasn't changed by ideology. It was changed by songs, by movies, by clothes, and by hairstyles. The way someone cut their hair became a symbol more powerful than any idea that a parent could offer. These were things that communicated and convinced tens of millions of kids to change culture, morals, and politics. It wasn't about logic or practicality. It was about everything that not shaving, not wearing shoes or a bra could communicate. Now, this was a generation which had had the most prosperous and peaceful childhood and adolescence in the entire history of humanity. But they looked around to the society around them and they did not find it beautiful. It was a hunger among the young to explore a new beauty. I think it led to many, many mistakes, but you have to understand the nature and the power of the impulse. Now, even in business you see this. Steve Jobs claimed that the central animating experience that created Apple was not from studying engineering, but calligraphy. He took a class in calligraphy, and he realized the shape of a thing was part of the meaning of a thing. The form a thing expresses, intentionally or unintentionally, is the reality of its essence. Almost everyone in society recognizes this, even though they don't understand it intellectually. The failure of the public sector in the United States, and I think in some ways in the Catholic Church, is embodied in thousands of ugly buildings and ugly public spaces. I can recommend a few parishes in Sonoma County. These places have been built practically. They are practical. They are functional in every respect except in practice. Since they communicate to the average person that the citizen is just a number in the game of cost efficiency and crowd management. Now, let's all imagine that we are in Washington, D.C., and I want you to visit two buildings. The first is the Lincoln Memorial, which is an embodiment of our political vision, the beauty of democracy expressed in great architecture, great sculpture, great landscaping, and even great language carved calligraphically into the stone walls of the memorial's interior. This is the moment that if those old enough like me remember from Frank Capra's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Walking up these steps, standing in the presence of this memorial to Lincoln, we recapture our faith in our system. But I want you to then walk with me for about another 3/4 of a mile so we can visit the FBI headquarters. You will recognize it because in every episode of the X-Files, it was shown as the symbol for governmental deceit and cold bureaucracy. It looks as if a spaceship has landed on another spaceship. It's surrounded by a concrete moat. The forms that things take express meaning whether we intend them to not. This is not a building that says government of the people, by the people, for the people. It is a building that says the government by the secret police and bureaucracy. Now, when the U.S. was a smaller, poorer country, we built public buildings, and the church built churches to express the greatness of their mission. Go to a Depression-era post office. You'll find marble floors, carved wooden counters, brass fixtures, and even often a mural illustrating local history. This was a vision of a beautiful society to which any citizen who entered participated in. You know, for the cost of a penny postcard, you were given the beautiful idea of a free society. Today, if you walk into a post office, you see vinyl and plexiglass. It offers no vision but expediency. We are not citizens, but customers of a cut-rate 99-cent version of democracy. No wonder Americans no longer believe in the government. The government no longer believes in them as alert, intelligent, sensory human beings. Until we discover how to embody our civic vision in beauty, the public will remain more X-Files than Mr. Smith goes to Washington. Beauty inspires us to transform ourselves and our world. It gives us a vision of our own possibilities. When the Catholic Church abandons art, when it neglects beauty, it loses one of the most important ways in which its message is heard in the world. Dante and Hopkins, Mozart and Bach, Michelangelo and El Greco, Bramante and Gaudi have brought more souls to God than all the preachers of Texas. Beauty inspires us to transform ourselves and our world. It gives us a vision of our own possibilities. Art awakens us to our lives. It enlarges and refines our humanity. It calls us to understand our complex existence. Its pleasure allows us to feel the truth of insights that are often too uncomfortable to recognize or willingly embrace without that. Beauty leads us on by pleasure, illumination, and love to transform ourselves in accordance with the beautiful objects of our desires. That's why when Dostoevsky said, "Beauty will save the world," this is in another novel, he was not uttering a social formula. He was uttering a prophecy. Beauty by itself won't save anything. What he implied was something different. Without beauty, there is no practical way to change the world, no universal means of communication or inspiration that will suffice, no equally powerful way for humanity to know and love the good and the true. The world is charged by the grandeur of God. It is not an abstract or intangible grandeur. It surrounds us. We feel it. We need it. Man hungers for beauty. There is a void. We are, by our very natures, drawn to this grandeur, this glory, this beauty. We ignore it at the risk of misunderstanding ourselves, the world, and all creation. Because beauty, in this sense, will save the world. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.